Today, we are diving into a massive story out of Minnesota. It's a story about millions upon millions of taxpayer dollars, money that was supposed to help kids that might have just vanished into thin air, or more accurately, into daycare centers with no children. We're going to look at how this alleged scheme worked, the unbelievable scale of it, and the decade-long trail of warnings that, it seems, nobody wanted to hear.
Let's just start with a single number, because it really sets the stage. $6.67 million. Now get this. According to investigators, that's how much one daycare center, licensed for only 90 kids, raked in from public funds in just 2 years. It's an absolutely staggering amount of money.
So what happens when an investigator shows up at this multi-million-dollar facility? Well, they ask a very simple question. Are there children here today? And the answer they get back is just a single word: no. That one exchange, right there, is the whole mystery in a nutshell.
You see the problem, right? The state was pumping a fortune into these childcare centers. But when the investigators actually showed up, time and time again, they were supposedly met with locked doors, blacked out windows, and just empty rooms. It begs the obvious question: where in the world did all that money go?
Well, to answer that, you have to understand how they allegedly pulled this off. And what investigators say they've uncovered is basically a playbook, a systematic, repeatable way to exploit a program that was built to help people who really need it. And at the very heart of this whole thing is something called the Child Care Assistance Program, or CCAP. It's a taxpayer-funded program, a mix of federal and state money, and it's supposed to help low-income families afford childcare. But in this case, it became the target.
So, how did the scheme allegedly work? Well, based on surveillance footage, it was almost laughably simple. First, you enroll families who qualify for the funding. Then, parents would literally check their kids in, only to turn around and leave with them just minutes later. Sometimes the kids wouldn't even show up at all. But no matter what, the center would then turn around and bill the state for a full day of care that, well, was never actually provided.
And this slide, wow, it just lays it all out. Look at the difference between what was on paper and what investigators allegedly found. On paper, a center licensed for 120 kids, open 7 days a week, getting up to $3 million a year. The reality? Locked doors during business hours, blacked out windows, and not a single kid to be found.
All right, so we've seen how it allegedly worked. Now, let's zoom out and look at the financial scale of this thing. Because we are not talking about a few bad apples here. The numbers are absolutely breathtaking.
Just take a look at these figures. These are for individual daycare centers in a single year. You've got the ironically named Quality Learning Center, and yes, they really did misspell learning on their own sign, pulling in $1.9 million. Creative Minds, nearly $2.5 million, and Future Leaders was averaging over $3 million a year. I mean, these are just insane amounts of money for what are supposed to be neighborhood daycares. So when you add it all up, a media investigation back in 2018 came up with a jaw-dropping estimate. The total cost of this childcare fraud to taxpayers could be as high as $100 million every single year.
And if you think that's bad, hold on. According to investigators, the problem doesn't even stop with childcare. They've found similar shady patterns in home health care and medical transportation. Some of the total estimates for fraud across all of these sectors reach as high as $7 to $10 billion. It's just hard to even comprehend.
Now, a problem this huge doesn't just pop up overnight, right? So you have to wonder, did this just catch the state completely by surprise? Well, according to the sources, not even close. In fact, they point to a timeline of repeated warnings that goes back almost a decade.
Let's just walk through this timeline of what looked like a lot of missed opportunities. As far back as 2013, you've got a whistleblower screaming about $100 million in suspicious cases. By 2015, there's actual video evidence of the fraud happening. In 2017, a manager inside the Department of Human Services is sending desperate emails. And then finally, in 2018, a major news investigation blows the lid off the whole thing for the public to see.
That same whistleblower from 2013 later said they were just shocked that so little had been done. They were convinced this wasn't just a few rogue operators. They believed the problem was systemic, and, in their words, that it runs all the way to the top. And the warnings coming from inside the system were just as grim. In 2017, a DHS manager named Scott Stillman warned his bosses that they were being overwhelmed by organized crime that was stealing hundreds of millions. According to the sources, his warnings were basically buried, and he eventually just resigned in total frustration.
So, all of this brings us to the biggest question of all: accountability. Right? With so much money gone, So many warnings apparently ignored. Who has actually faced any consequences? And what are the most serious claims about where all that cash ended up?
The sources do point to a few prosecutions, and the case of Fazia Ali is a pretty wild example. She ran the Salama Child Care Center and billed for over $1 million in services that were never provided, at one point inflating her attendance numbers by more than 400%. She was even caught billing the state from her phone while she was on a luxury vacation in Dubai. She did plead guilty, and she was sentenced to federal prison.
But the Fazia Ali case hints at what is by far the most explosive allegation in all of the source material. Investigators claim that hundreds of millions of dollars in cash were literally being stuffed into suitcases and carried overseas, with some of that money allegedly being funneled to regions controlled by the terrorist group Al-Shabaab.
As you can probably guess, this whole thing has become a political firestorm. On one side, you have investigators claiming that the state's leadership basically enabled this fraud to happen in exchange for political support and votes. But on the other side, you have officials saying, hey, fraud is a bipartisan problem, it happens in all 50 states, and they accuse their critics of just trying to score political points.
And this quote from a state representative really sums up that official response. When she was confronted about the findings of a legislative investigation, she just dismissed it. She claimed the people behind it weren't interested in fixing fraud, they were just interested in, quote, telling a story.
So after a decade of warnings, after surveillance videos and internal alarms, after billions of dollars in alleged fraudulent payments, we are left with this one giant fundamental question. In a scheme this massive that went on for this long, who, if anyone, is actually going to be held accountable?